The autumn rain drummed against the windshield of Patrol Car 47 as it sat motionless in the parking lot of Abraham Lincoln Elementary School. The wipers had stopped mid-stroke hours ago, leaving streaks of water that distorted the view of the abandoned brick building beyond. Inside the vehicle, the radio crackled with static, its volume turned low, as if someone had been listening intently to every transmission that came through that October night in 1995. Officer Michael Barnes approached the patrol car with growing unease, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. He had been Jessica Thompson's partner for 3 years, and in all that time, she had never failed to follow protocol. When they had received the call about vandalism at the old elementary school, Jessica had taken point while he circled around to check the rear entrance. Standard procedure, nothing unusual. But that was 45 minutes ago, and now the silence felt heavy with something he couldn't quite name. The driver's side door hung open, swaying slightly in the wind. Jessica's duty belt lay neatly folded on the passenger seat, her service weapon still holstered. Her coffee cup sat in the center console, still warm to the touch. Everything suggested she had stepped out of the vehicle with every intention of returning. Everything except the single fingernail that lay on the driver's seat, its pink polish catching the beam of Barnes's flashlight like a tiny beacon in the darkness. Barnes keyed his radio with trembling fingers, his voice barely steady as he called for backup. The nail appeared fresh, torn raggedly at the base, with what looked like dried blood underneath. But there were no signs of a struggle, no scuff marks in the dirt, no torn fabric caught on the car door. Officer Jessica Thompson, a decorated cop with 12 years on the force, had simply vanished into the October night, leaving behind only this single, inexplicable clue. The Millbrook Police Department would spend the next several years following every lead and exploring every possibility. But Jessica Thompson's case would challenge everything they thought they understood about missing persons investigations in their quiet Midwestern town, becoming one of the most perplexing, unsolved mysteries in the state's history. The call had come in at 9:47 p.m. on October 15, 1995. Mrs. Eleanor Hoffman, who lived across from the abandoned elementary school, reported seeing flashlight beams moving through the building's windows. The school had been closed for 2 years following budget cuts, and the district was still deciding what to do with the property. Vandalism had become a recurring problem, with teenagers using the empty classrooms for gatherings and local individuals seeking shelter from the increasingly cold autumn nights. Jessica Thompson had been the natural choice to respond to the call. At 32, she was one of the most experienced officers on the night shift, known for her methodical approach and her ability to handle difficult situations with professionalism. She had grown up in Millbrook, graduated from the very high school where she now kept the peace, and had earned the respect of both her colleagues and the community she served. Her personnel file contained commendations for excellent service, community involvement awards, and not a single disciplinary action. Barnes remembered the easy confidence in Jessica's voice as they discussed their approach to the school. She would take the main entrance while he covered the back, a strategy they had used countless times before. The building was familiar territory. They had both responded to calls there in the past, and neither expected anything more complicated than asking a few individuals to move along or directing them to appropriate shelter services. The Abraham Lincoln Elementary School sat on Maple Street like a monument to better times. Built in 1952, its red brick facade and tall windows had once welcomed hundreds of children each morning. Now, boards covered most of those windows, and graffiti decorated the walls that had once displayed children's artwork. The playground equipment had been removed, leaving behind only metal posts and patches of grass where swings and slides had once stood. As Barnes had made his way around the perimeter of the building, he noted that several of the boards covering the rear windows had been moved, creating gaps large enough for someone to enter. This wasn't unusual. The building had been accessed multiple times since its closure, but it did suggest that Mrs. Hoffman's report had been accurate. Someone was indeed using the abandoned school for unknown purposes. The back entrance, a heavy metal door marked staff only, showed signs of having been opened recently. The lock had been damaged months ago, and the door hung slightly ajar. Barnes had radioed Jessica to report his findings, but received no response. Assuming she was speaking with whoever had been inside the building, he had continued his patrol of the exterior, checking windows and looking for additional points of entry. It was only when he completed his circuit and returned to the front of the building that Barnes realized something was wrong. The patrol car sat exactly where they had left it, but there was no sign of Jessica. No sounds of conversation from within the building. No response to his radio calls, just an eerie silence that seemed to swallow his voice when he called her name. The investigation that followed would consume the Millbrook Police Department for months. Detective Ray Sullivan, a 20-year veteran who had worked every major case in the county, took the lead. Sullivan was known for his thoroughness and his commitment to finding answers, qualities that had earned him respect from departments across the state. But Jessica Thompson's disappearance would test even his considerable experience. The crime scene team processed the patrol car and the immediate area with careful attention to detail. The fingernail on the driver's seat was photographed, measured, and collected as evidence. Fingerprint analysis revealed Jessica's prints on the steering wheel, radio, and door handle exactly as expected. But there were no other prints, no fibers, no additional evidence to suggest that anyone else had been in or near the vehicle. The nail itself presented more questions than answers. Laboratory analysis confirmed that it was human, recently separated, and contained traces of blood. But without advanced DNA testing, which was not readily available in 1995, definitive identification remained challenging. More puzzling was the condition of the nail. It showed no obvious signs of having been torn during any kind of altercation. Inside the school building, investigators found evidence of recent occupation. Food containers, beverage bottles, and other items suggested that someone had been using the abandoned classrooms as a temporary shelter. But there were no clear signs of Jessica's presence, no footprints that definitively matched her service boots, no indication that she had ever entered the building at all. If you're following along with this mysterious case, we'd love to hear your theories in the comments below. What do you think happened to Jessica Thompson that night? Don't forget to subscribe for more unsolved mysteries like this one. The mystery deepened when investigators interviewed Mrs. Hoffman more thoroughly. The elderly woman remained certain about what she had seen, flashlight beams moving through the school's windows between 9:30 and 10:15 p.m., but she could not say how many people were involved or whether she had seen anyone leave the building. Her view was partially blocked by trees, and the rain had made visibility challenging. Other residents of Maple Street were interviewed, but none reported seeing or hearing anything unusual that evening. The Henderson family, who lived directly next to the school, had been watching television and heard nothing out of the ordinary. The Kowalski house across the street had been empty, its residents visiting family in another city. One by one, potential witnesses were eliminated, leaving investigators with growing questions and very few concrete answers. Detective Sullivan expanded the investigation beyond the immediate area. Jessica's personal life was examined carefully, her finances reviewed, her relationships considered, but nothing suggested a reason for her to leave voluntarily. She was engaged to marry David Chen, a local teacher, in the following spring. They had recently made plans for their future together and were actively preparing for their wedding. Her bank accounts showed no unusual activity. Her credit cards had not been used since the morning of her disappearance. Friends and family described Jessica as stable, content, and looking forward to her future. Her sister, Margaret, traveled from Denver and spent considerable time with investigators, providing insight into Jessica's state of mind in the weeks before her disappearance. There had been no personal conflicts, no financial concerns, no health issues that might have influenced her decision-making. By all accounts, Jessica Thompson had every reason to continue with her planned life and no apparent motivation to disappear. The investigation took on new dimensions when Detective Sullivan discovered that similar disappearances had been reported in neighboring counties over the past several years. 3 other individuals had vanished under circumstances that shared puzzling similarities with Jessica's case. All had been alone when they disappeared. All had left behind personal belongings that suggested they intended to return shortly. And in each case, investigators had found a single fingernail as the only unusual evidence at the scene. Sullivan requested files from these other cases and began to identify patterns that concerned him deeply. The disappearances occurred at irregular intervals, always in smaller communities, always involving individuals who had been alone and in vulnerable situations. The missing persons included a night security officer, a store clerk working a late shift, and a healthcare worker leaving after her evening shift. All were described as reliable, responsible individuals who maintained strong connections to their communities. As Sullivan studied these cases more closely, he noticed something troubling about the investigation processes. Each scene had been processed by forensics teams that included a technician named Thomas Garrett, who worked for a contracting company that served rural police departments across the region. Garrett had been present at every location where a fingernail had been discovered, and in each case, his reports had been thorough and professional. When Sullivan attempted to contact Garrett for additional information about his observations at these scenes, he discovered that the technician had not reported to work in over a week. His supervisor at Midwest Evidence Processing explained that Garrett had simply stopped showing up, providing no explanation or forwarding information. His apartment had been vacated, his lease terminated abruptly, and his whereabouts were completely unknown. This development prompted Sullivan to examine Garrett's background more carefully. What he discovered raised serious questions about the man's identity and qualifications. While Garrett's work had always been competent, his credentials were difficult to verify. Previous employers provided vague references, and some of the institutions listed on his resume had no record of his employment. The investigation into Thomas Garrett revealed that the man had assumed the identity of someone who had died several years earlier. The real Thomas Garrett had been killed in an accident in Nevada in 1989, but somehow his identity had been adopted by someone else who had used it to build a new life and gain access to crime scenes across multiple states. Sullivan's team expanded their search and eventually located Garrett's abandoned work vehicle in a shopping center parking lot 2 counties away. Inside the van, hidden in a concealed compartment, investigators made a discovery that completely changed their understanding of the case. They found several glass containers, each holding what appeared to be a preserved human fingernail, including one that laboratory analysis would later confirm matched the nail found in Jessica's patrol car. The implications of this discovery were staggering. If Garrett had been collecting these nails, had he also been responsible for placing them at the crime scenes? Were the disappearances connected to his presence at the investigations, or was there some other explanation for this bizarre collection? Further investigation revealed that the fingernails had not come from the missing individuals at all, but from other sources entirely. DNA analysis, when it became available years later, would show that none of the nails belonged to Jessica Thompson or the other missing persons. Instead, they appeared to have been obtained from medical waste or morgue sources, then planted at crime scenes for reasons that remained unclear. The discovery that the physical evidence had been fabricated forced investigators to completely reconsider their approach to the case. If the fingernails were false clues, what had actually happened to Jessica Thompson and the other missing individuals? Were they victims of crimes that had been covered up by planted evidence, or had something else entirely occurred? As the investigation continued, authorities discovered that the man using Thomas Garrett's identity had connections to several unsolved cases across multiple states. His pattern seemed to involve inserting himself into investigations, sometimes as a contractor, sometimes as a volunteer, always finding ways to influence the collection and interpretation of evidence. The scope of the deception became clear when investigators traced the false identity back through several years of carefully constructed background information. Bank accounts, rental agreements, employment records, all had been meticulously created to support the fictional persona. Whoever was behind this elaborate scheme had invested considerable time and resources in maintaining the deception. Federal authorities became involved when the interstate nature of the case became apparent. FBI investigators brought additional resources and expertise to bear on what had become one of the most complex missing persons investigations in the region's history. Their analysis suggested that the perpetrator was likely someone with extensive knowledge of police procedures and forensic processes. The breakthrough in Jessica Thompson's case came not from traditional investigative work, but from an unexpected source. A construction crew working on renovations to a defunct factory complex in a neighboring county discovered a hidden room that showed signs of recent occupation. Inside, they found personal belongings that belonged to several of the missing individuals, including Jessica's police academy graduation ring and a distinctive watch that her family had given her for Christmas. The room appeared to have been used as some kind of temporary holding area, but there were no signs of violence or struggle. Instead, the evidence suggested that the missing individuals had been kept there for a period of time before being moved elsewhere. Maps found in the room indicated locations across several states, suggesting a network of similar facilities. Jessica Thompson was eventually located at a remote cabin in the mountains of Colorado, living under an assumed name and apparently suffering from severe memory loss. She had no recollection of her disappearance or the events that followed, remembering only fragments of her life before that October night in 1995. Medical examination revealed evidence of prolonged stress, but no signs of physical harm. The other missing individuals were found in similar circumstances, all living in different locations under false identities, all suffering from various degrees of memory impairment. None could provide clear accounts of what had happened to them or how they had ended up in their new situations. Medical professionals theorized that they might have been subjected to psychological manipulation or chemical treatments that affected their memory formation. The man who had been using Thomas Garrett's identity was never located, despite an extensive manhunt that involved multiple law enforcement agencies. Several properties connected to his false identity were searched, but he had apparently abandoned them well before authorities discovered his deception. His true identity remains unknown, and the full scope of his activities may never be completely understood. The case officially remains open, classified as one of the most unusual criminal investigations in recent history. The recovery of the missing individuals provided some closure for their families, but many questions persist about the methods used and the motivations behind such an elaborate scheme. Experts who have studied the case suggest that it represents a new type of criminal behavior that combines identity theft, psychological manipulation, and sophisticated planning. Today, Jessica Thompson lives quietly in a different state, having chosen to start fresh rather than attempt to reconstruct her previous life. She has no memory of her career as a police officer or her planned marriage, existing in a present that has no connection to her past. Her family remains hopeful that her memories might eventually return, but medical professionals caution that some types of memory loss may be permanent. The Abraham Lincoln Elementary School was eventually demolished and replaced with a small community park. The site holds no particular significance for current residents, who remain largely unaware of the mysterious events that once unfolded there. The case files remain active, stored in both local and federal databases, waiting for new information that might finally provide complete answers. Jessica Thompson's disappearance serves as a reminder that even in small, quiet communities, extraordinary events can occur that challenge our understanding of criminal behavior. Her story demonstrates the importance of thorough investigation and the dangers of accepting physical evidence at face value. Most importantly, it shows that sometimes the most important outcome is not solving every mystery, but ensuring that victims are returned safely to their families, even when the full truth remains elusive. The single fingernail that started this entire investigation turned out to be nothing more than misdirection, a red herring designed to confuse and delay the search for truth. But it also became the key that eventually unlocked a much larger mystery, proving that sometimes the smallest details can lead to the most significant discoveries. In the end, Jessica Thompson's case reminds us that reality can be stranger than fiction, and that the search for truth requires persistence, creativity, and the willingness to question everything we think we know.